Withology is about collaboration, inspiration, dedication, influence, and positive manifestation. It's about the stories behind success, something everyone needs a little bit of help achieving. Join host Brian Tierney, CEO of Brian Communications, as he interviews the most successful business and industry leaders to hear the fascinating stories about their personal journeys and the people who have helped them get to where they are today. Welcome to Withology.
Hello, and welcome to Withology. I'm Brian Tierney, CEO of Brian Communications, and today I'm joined by Emmy Award-winning journalist and host of ABC's Nightline, Byron Pitts. With over 20 years of experience, he's known for his thoughtful storytelling, on-the-ground reporting, and in-depth interviews. But Byron's path to journalism success was not an easy one. Today we'll explore his early days, his personal journey to where he is now, and those who helped him along the way. Because success is never accomplished alone, it's always with others. That's the whole point of Withology. Byron, it's great to have you with us today. Go back to the beginning. You were born in Baltimore, right?
Yes, born and raised in East Baltimore. For those from the city, they know there's a big difference between East and West Baltimore. Raised in a working class family. My parents divorced when I was 12, but for the first 12 years of my life, we lived in a working class black neighborhood. My mother was a seamstress at the London Fog Coat Factory in Baltimore. My dad was a meat cutter at the SK Meat Company in Baltimore. He drove cab on the side as well to help ends meet. So from the outside world, we looked like we were doing just great, right? My parents had full-time jobs. We were active in our church. They were raising 3 kids. But behind closed doors, my parents had a very volatile relationship. Lots of physical violence between the two of them. Infidelity was a big issue that ultimately ended up ending their marriage. In fact, my father had a child outside the marriage, and he and his, whatever word want to use to describe her, mistress, the mother of this child, they named the child Myron, which always caused my mother great discomfort because there was a whole psychological thing going on there. So it was a tough existence. Then eventually at 12, my parents divorced. My mother left my father on Christmas Eve, 1972. And the economic circumstances of our life became much more complicated, much more challenging. But the house became a much more peaceful place. And then it was at that point, I think, because of the peace that the end of their marriage brought to our family, we were able to pay attention to issues going on with me. I didn't learn to read until I was 12, going on 13. I spoke with a stutter until I was a junior in college. And so those 2 issues shaped how I felt about myself. I mean, I didn't know I'd never heard the term self-esteem, but certainly I had none as a small boy.
You were diagnosed, or not diagnosed because some fool was wrong, but they said, oh, he's functionally illiterate and perhaps institutionalized or something like, it's incredible to think of what you've accomplished as you're sitting here and to think that your mom had this faith in you, you somehow had it in yourself, even when all these people are saying these other things. So I walk through a little bit about that. Like what was,
Yeah, my mom was a remarkable woman. Her name was Clarice Pitts. It's interesting. My mother's birth certificate, for whatever reason, they listed her as a man, as a male child. Which to anyone who knew my mother, that was always pretty funny because she was such a tough person. I mean, my mother could quote scripture like any church elder, and she could also cuss with any sailor or marine in a bar, right? So she was a tough, demanding woman, but equally loving. Certainly my mother had faith in me, but more than that, she had faith in God. And it was a faith that she taught me. People who know me at all know that I'm Christian. My faith is vitally important to who I am. Now, certainly it was the great Yankee catcher Yogi Berra who once said, always dance with the one that brung you. Now, I'm respectful of all faiths. Certainly in my professional life, I've been around the world and I've worshiped with people of other faiths and am respectful of other faith traditions. If I've been born in India, I might be Hindu. If I was born in Afghanistan, I might be Muslim. But I was born in East Baltimore. My mama was Baptist. My grandmama was Baptist. Therefore, I'm Baptist. And so it was that faith that led my mother to believe that if she remained optimistic, if she worked hard, if she prayed hard, that there might be a path forward for a child. To your earlier point, when I was struggling in school and failing all classes, they brought me in for a series of tests. These experts, I mean, Brian, these were the fancy folks with initials on the front end and back end of their names, right? They ran a series of tests. And they told my mother, they said, Miss Pitts, their words, not mine, your son is mentally retarded. And because you lack the means, the education, our only recommendation is that you place him in an institution. And my mother says, test him again. And they says, well, we just told you our results. And my mother, that part of her personality that could be aggressive, persuaded them it might be in their best interest in that moment to test me again. So, right? So they ran the test again, and they came back weeks later and said the results are the same. And these are your options. Place your son in an institution or bring him back when he's 18 years old. There might be federal or state funding to help him. And my mother, who was despite her lack of academic credentials, I mean, eventually my mom would go back to school as an adult learner, get a college degree, become a social worker. But in that particular moment, she was a woman with a 10th grade education, a factory worker. But she had vision about life. My mother says, if I wait until my boy is 18 years old, my son will be dead or in prison. He needs help right now. And so none was available. My mother was also a believer. There's nothing that hard work and prayer couldn't overcome. And this was before a computer, so she couldn't Google answers. So she would call people, ask people, look in the newspaper. And then finally we saw an ad on television for an adult literacy program. And so my mother called to see if she can get me involved in this adult literacy program. I said, "Man, these are for these are for adults." And again, my mother persuaded them that they should allow this 12-year-old boy to sit in this class with like truck drivers and maids and other type folk to learn how to read. So she enrolled me in the program. I got the help that I needed. And eventually, by the time I got to high school, I love to tell this story. My high school, I went to Archbishop Curley High School, an all boys Catholic high school. I had the best of both worlds, raised Baptist, educated Catholic. I was ranked 445th out of 450 students my freshman year in high school. And I've always thought, well, dang it. I know I had issues at 445. What was the poor fellow at 446, 447, 440? What were their issues? But eventually I graduated 40th in my class. Not the best student at my high school, but the best student I could be. And by the time I graduated, I was reading at about a 8th, 9th grade level. So when I went to college, I wasn't fully prepared for the college experience. And there were challenges there. And that's when my issues with stuttering became more of a challenge. But the same rules that my mother had taught me earlier would apply. My mother believed that if you worked hard, prayed hard, treated people right, good things will happen. And certainly that's been my story my entire life.
Yeah. You talk about when you went to Ohio Wesleyan, right? You're in college, and that moment when you're feeling kind of down and you're having some challenges and you're in a hallway and
oh yeah,
talk about that. And that professor from Estonia came by.
I had it's true for all of us, right? I mean, there are people who are encouragers and there are people who are discouragers. So in college, I was on academic probation at Ohio Wesleyan, failing everything. I took an English class, freshman English class over the second semester. Because again, my mother believed if I just worked harder and prayed longer, I'd do better. So I took the same class, same professor who'd given me an F the first semester. So I remember when I came into this class, he looked at me like, really? You want some more of this? So I came back. So early on during one of the exams, he's passing out exam results, like 12 people, small liberal arts college, 12 kids in the class. He's passing out papers. And he turns to me, he says out loud in front of the entire class, says, "Mr. Pitts, congratulations, best work thus far, D+. Come see me after class." 17 years old, raised to respect authority. Yes, sir. Went to his class afterwards. And this is a guy, he was like the quintessential college professor. He wore a cardigan sweater year round, fall, winter, spring, summer.
Mm-hmm.
He smoked a pipe, thick glasses, spoke with a a British accent, though I think he was probably from Cleveland, right? And so right. So he says,
I know the type. Yeah.
So he says, "Mr. Pitts, don't sit down. This won't take long." He says, "Mr. Pitts, you are not Ohio Wesleyan University material. As a tenured professor," and it took him like 20 minutes to say tenured. "As a tenured professor, I don't believe you're Ohio Wesleyan material, and I think you should leave." I mean, like, what, go back to my dorm? No. Go back to wherever you're from.
Wow.
Okay. So, I'm done. Like, I've been exposed. So I leave his office and go to the school to withdraw from college. And so I'm sitting out sitting out on a bench, and I started to cry
Wow.
because I realized in that moment, not only was I abandoning my dreams, but my mother's dreams, my coaches, the elders in my church, my grandmother, the people who had prayed for me and believed in me. And in this moment, I wasn't good enough. So I started to cry because the burden of disappointing these people. And about this time, this stranger walked by, a woman. She simply said, "Young man, what's wrong?" And then she sat down and talked to me. And I gave her my sad story. And she said, "Well, before you quit school, come see me tomorrow." Yes, ma'am. And so I went to see her tomorrow. And this woman, her name was Ula Luz. And Ula was, as it turns out, true story, Ula was a first year professor at Ohio Wesleyan. I was a first year student. I didn't know her. She didn't know me. And she wasn't just any professor, she was an English professor. She decided she'd work with me and became my unofficial advisor, counselor, tutor. And she unpacked for me what was required to be successful in college. And eventually, so the other professor, I was starting to get like, A's and B's in his assignments. In the beginning, I would get like, D's and F's in his assignment, and Ula would give me A's and B's on the same assignment because of creativity or effort. But by the end of the semester, I'm getting A's and B's
Mm-hmm.
in his class, and now Ula is giving me D's and F's because she's raised the bar. I mean, she showed me grace, she showed me kindness. I mean, she showed me, as we all know, like truth can be harsh,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have to be unkind. And that you can grow people, you can, if they're willing, right?
Right.
I mean, that's part of what makes America so wonderful. This is a place that, if given the opportunity, if you put in the effort, the results can work in your favor. And so I always say that Ula didn't simply, change my life; she saved my life. And again, an example of what's been true in my life. At every, I mean, my late mom would call them angels, right? But at every intersection of my life, an angel has always been present who said, "It's going to be okay. God's got you. I got you. You're good."
Isn't it amazing when you think about that? I mean, here you are just feeling that moment of complete
Yeah.
down,
Yeah.
feeling broken, and then the kindness of somebody who sees you. And it's inspiration for all of us to always be thinking about in our own lives. Are we looking for that person that we can stop and have a moment with?
I heard someone say just to me just the other week that said, every day you can be somebody's answer.
That's a beautiful thought.
You can like be somebody's answer. And that answer could be, "Hey, good morning. Bro, how you doing? What's up, sis? How you doing? Let me buy you a cup of coffee." It
Right.
doesn't have to
Right.
be, dealing with the homeless guy at a traffic light. It can be someone in
Right.
your space with a kind word, a kind gesture, giving an opportunity to someone at work who may not deserve it on paper, but you see something in them. It may be showing grace to your partner, to your spouse, to your child. That was one of the great things about my mother, that she was often my answer every day. Like some days it was a kick in the butt, right? Some days it was like I used to joke the old joke that, for the first, I don't know, 15 years of my life, I thought my first name was God damn it, right? Because it was God damn it, boy, God damn it, Byron. I mean, she could be demanding, but at the same time, she was my answer when I needed comfort. She was my answer when I needed love. She was remarkable. Like, my mother never missed one of my, if I may tell, one of my favorite stories about my mom. So I played football through high school and college. A big part of my self-worth was connected to sports. And so my mother went to every game from Pop Warner through high school. My mom never missed a game. In fact, I remember one year my mom, when I was in high school, had a hysterectomy, which is difficult surgery today for a woman. It was really difficult for a woman in the 1970s. And my mother scheduled it early in the week so she could potentially have the best chance of making it to my game Friday night. So Friday night comes, and she's still not well enough to go. And the doctor says, "I'm sorry, Miss Pitts, you can't leave the hospital." She's like, "Okay, appreciate it. Thank you so much." She had my brother come over, bring his trench coat, and snuck her out of the hospital, brought her to the game, and she watched me play. Then he snuck her back in the hospital. And then my mother bought a film camera and would record my games, and like we would have film sessions on Saturdays. Anyway, so fast forward, I play college football. I'm done with football. I get my first kind of real job making a halfway decent salary. For Christmas that year, I brought my mother Super Bowl tickets, thinking, I know how much this woman loves football. We'll go to the Super Bowl. So my mom was big, and she liked gifts, and she liked cards with money in them for Christmas. She was unapologetic about that. So Christmas, these tickets were expensive. So I don't have a box that year. I just have a card. So my mom's looking around for a box. There's no box. And so she opens up her card and she's looking for, green things to fall out. There were no green things falling out. She holds up the ticket. She goes, "Son, what are these?" I said, "Mama, those are Super Bowl tickets." She says, "Boy, I can read. I know what they are, but why are you giving them to me?" I said, "Mom, I know how much you love football." She says, "Son, I don't give a damn about football. I only watch because you play." Right. Like the second you were done, I thank God you were done playing football. I haven't watched a game since. I don't want these tickets. But it spoke to who she was. My mother was a original ride or die, all in. If her kids were into it, she was into it.
That's great. You had a college roommate who also talk about him. I did a little homework too. It looks like he passed away a couple of years ago too, at a young age too.
Yes, Peter Holthe from Minnetonka, Minnesota. Pete died in his 40s. So Pete and I met freshman year in college, remained friends. I was with Pete the night before he died. I went to see him with his wife, his home in Minnesota. He was now sleeping in their living room in a bed they'd made for him in the living room. And so I crawled in bed with him like two schoolgirls, kissing, hugging, talking, whispering, laughing, knowing it was our last conversation. But Pete and I met our freshman year in college. I was from East Baltimore. Pete was from Minnetonka. It's fair to say Pete didn't know many people from Minnetonka like me, and I didn't know anyone in East Baltimore like Pete. But we became fast friends. In fact, Pete used to call me baby boy. And I guess that's what, that was the Minnetonka cool version of the way a white dude would talk to a black dude, right? He'd call me baby boy. So we were really tight. And our freshman year, we were hallway buddies and would spend a lot of time in each other's room. Pete was a botany major, brilliant man. He went on to become a cancer researcher, like one of the premier cancer researchers in the country, and devoted his life to that kind of work. So at the time, we were talking late one night, as you do in college, like, eating cold pizza, drinking whatever you drank in college. Sweet tea was my drink of choice. And Pete was some expensive beer. Anyway, so Pete said, "Baby boy, let me ask you a question. Why is it that, you use words that don't make sense and you're like failing everything? I see you studying, but you suck at school. Like, what's that about?" So he came at me in a harsh way. I mean, he presented a harsh truth to me, but he wasn't unkind about it.
Yeah.
And I explained to him my issues with literacy and my challenges academically that, again, I wasn't even reading at a 11th grade level, and now I'm a freshman in college. And so things are coming at me, I'm just overwhelmed by it. And so Pete shook his head like, "Okay, baby boy, I got it." Again, I'm 17, Pete's 18 years old. Pete said, "Here's what we're going to do. Every day for the next 4 years, I'm going to give you a new word in the dictionary. You're going to say it, spell it, use it in a sentence. Because when I graduate in 4 years, you're going to graduate with me." And like, okay. And that's what we did every day for, like, even in the summertime, he would call me, we would talk on the phone, and he would give me a new word. And the expectation was I was to use it in a sentence, in a conversation at some later point.
Yeah. Let's talk about pivot points in life and then also, your journalism part of career. Let's talk about that. Like when you think about moments, obviously the kindness and love and support of your mom going through it, her saying, "My son is not functionally illiterate. We're going to figure this out." Those are pivot points. Talk about some of the other ones and why journalism? I mean, what made you think about that as a career?
Sure. And I love that question, right? Because all of us, there are pivot points for all of us, right?
And sometimes you don't see them at that point.
Right.
You look back and you realize, wow, that was two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and I took this one. Yeah.
Right. And thank God I did, or man, I wish I'd gone the other way, right?
Uh-huh.
As a person of faith, I was raised to believe that God makes no accidents, that all things happen to our life for a reason, and that we have to find what those reasons are. So I had felt by the time I was in high school, certainly by the time I was in college, I fell in love with words, with reading in a way that something that had been closed to me, something was open to me. And so I think I appreciated words in the way many of my peers at the time probably did. So there's that. And so our church was active in the civil rights movement from a fundraising standpoint. And so we'd have Dr. King, Ralph Abernathy, Coretta Scott King would come and perform, would sing.
Wow.
And our church would go participate in rallies, civil rights rallies in the area. And so my mother would take us or take me because she couldn't afford childcare. So it was like, okay, if I'm going, my mother took me everywhere she went. If she went to a happy hour on Friday with her girlfriends, I went. If she went to night school, I went. And so when she would go to these rallies, I would go, just like we're seeing now with these Black Lives Matter rallies. I would imagine there's a Clarice Pitts with a little boy Byron somewhere in those crowds. So we would go. And as a little boy, I remember when we would go to these rallies, the bigger rallies, and the media was there. The police would say, "Excuse me, ma'am, please back up. Sir, across the street. Little boy, please." Right? They were polite. They were professional. In the rallies we would go to where there was no media presence, "Hey, get the hell back." Got, profanity, aggressive, physicality.
Right.
And so as a little boy, I saw the power of the media to keep the powerful accountable. And that made an impression on me.
Yeah, I share now the foundation for the Poynter Institute. I love being involved with that. But when I, for 4 years plus, was the publisher at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and seeing it up close, one time we had a story that ran about, these children and who were falling through the cracks and being abused. And I went down to the newsroom to congratulate the two reporters who had written it. There was this woman in there in her 70s. And I said, "Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt you, ma'am." And she said, "I didn't have an appointment, sir. My daughter's addicted to drugs. My granddaughter is in the care of DHS. And I came by here to see if these men can help me save my granddaughter's life." She cried. I cried. I remember thinking, this is really God's work, man. This is so cool. All I'm trying to do is sell ads, but and the business side of it, but to be associated with it, with people like you and the journal, I mean, it just makes you feel so.
Yeah.
It is really important work, and particularly important right now too. I mean, how's it different now in journalism versus 10 years ago, 20 years ago?
Never been a better time to be a journalist than right now.
Oh, that's great, man. I love that optimism. Yes.
Like, our job is to tell the truth, is to find information, find facts, and present it as best we can to the American people. Like, I don't subscribe to the notion that there are two sides to every story. Just like there aren't just two sides to a house. There's a front, the house looks one way in the front, different in the back, on the side. And if you were on the roof, you'd see something different, right? And so that's kind of what truth is, what facts are. Like, I always tell people, like the facts are slavery was legal in the United States. The truth is it was always wrong. And so I think as journalists, true journalists, I think it's your job to fight, to search, to have conversations with truth and facts and try and line those things up and not give your opinion. I mean, certainly we're all shape our life experiences, right? Like, as a Black man from East Baltimore, my life experience with law enforcement was different than Peter Holthe, right? From Minnetonka, Minnesota.
Right.
And so certainly I bring that life experience to my job. And to me, what that simply says is I know that the police can be flawed, right? That the strong arm of the law sometimes can hurt innocent people. Like, I understand that. And, one of the earlier questions, like pivotal moments, one of the pivotal moments for me was I was a young reporter in Greenville, North Carolina, and I was sent to cover a Klan jamboree. Sounds nice enough, right? It was like a 3-day event in the woods. I wonder later, like, why would my boss send me, the only Black reporter on staff, to cover? Maybe he had a sense of humor. I'm not really certain. So anyway, these Klan members agreed to allow me to cover this event, 3-day event. And so I have to spend the night out in the woods at this gym. So they're like, imagine like people in hoods, his and her hoods, junior hoods, little boys, little girls. So I wake up on a Saturday morning, and I wake up to the sound of children's choir singing Amazing Grace, which is one of my mom's favorite songs. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Interesting enough, that song was written by a slave ship captain.
Really?
Who realized slavery was wrong. And God spoke to him that he had been blind, that slavery was wrong. And eventually he became an abolitionist. So Amazing Grace was originally like a poem.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Worse, this man convicting his own behavior. Anyway, so oddly enough, years later, I'm at a Klan jamboree, and Klan Children's Choir is singing Amazing Grace. I guess they liked the words, didn't really sort of understand its history. Anyway, so I sit up, and I'm a hard sleeper normally. So I kind of wake up in a daze, and I open my tent, like on my knees. Being raised in the church, I love Christian music, right? It speaks to my heart.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay. So I wake up, I open the curtain, this amazing song, and I see all these white kids, teenagers in Klan outfits, burning cross. And I go, huh. So now there's this conflict, right? That clearly, as a human being, how I see the world and how the Klan sees the world is very different. But yet I'm Christian. These people profess to be Christian, and we both love the same song. But yeah, I'm here as a journalist. I'm not here particularly as a Christian. I'm not really even here as, as an American. I'm here as a journalist
Right.
to honor these people's truth, not to judge it, but to say, here's what they believe, or here are the facts around what they do. And so for me, that was one of those pivotal moments as a journalist, that it's my job. I can bring my life experience to an event, but it's my job to honor the truth of that space, to speak facts, to, if appropriate, speak truth to power, if appropriate, give voice to the voiceless.
That's an amazing story. I mean, to be covering early in your career a Klan camp, I mean, for 3 days, I mean, which is really a beautiful way, though, to look at it as a journalist, that I'm here to tell a story. I bring myself to the table when I'm telling that story.
Oh yeah.
But it's really, that must be such a challenge, though. I mean,
But it's a joy, though. It's a joyous challenge, right? It's like, that's also part of the journalist, not just to certainly find the facts and the truth, but find the commonality for us, right? That we as Americans, I think, when we get to that point, like, again, I used the example in the 1960s, like, I always use the example of, in comparison, the death of Emmett Till with the death of George Floyd. Right? Emmett Till was a young child from Chicago visiting family in the South, was beaten to death. Now, black males have been dying at the hands of angry whites for a very long time. But his image, when good and decent people saw that and thought, grown men beating a child to death, that isn't right, right? And so I think that's my job, to find the facts and find the commonality that will allow us to see something through the same lens.
so how do you handle it when there's an important story to tell and that corporation or that they won't say anything, or they're trying to hide out, or they refuse to answer your questions, but you got to still tell that you.
Yeah, I come from a family where people have worked really hard with their hands, with their backs. I am the descendant of slaves, people who were treated like animals, like farm equipment. So when I think about, how hard my workday is,
Right.
how hard I have to press to get information sometimes, I'm like, okay, young fella, like, okay, slow your roll, chill out, right? The fact, you know what I mean? So to me, it's like, it's never that hard. And as you know, there's always, in every institution, there are always people who want to talk. There are always people who have a point they want to make. I mean, I always feel like, as a journalist, that, and most of the great journalism I've seen done at your old paper and in other places is done, with people with different degrees of intellect, but they're all really hard workers. So I found that hard work, cures a lot of things.
What's been the most challenging day of your professional career? Is there anything you can think of that, boy, that was a day that was.
If I may get two answers, one, certainly, I think 9/11 just was physically demanding. It was emotionally tough. As a journalist, I think I counted once. I've seen about 48 people die in my professional life. I've covered 2 executions. I covered the execution of Timothy McVeigh, put to death by lethal injection. I've seen people killed in war zones, uprisings around the world. And so, like, being around death, as a young person, I saw people shot to death. So I've been around death a lot of my life. That doesn't really make me uncomfortable. In most situations in which I've watched people die, they played some role in it. In a war zone, people expect to die. If you're in a violent neighborhood and bad things happen, there's some expectation. But on September 11, 2001, folk were just gone to work, kissed their spouse, sent their kids off to school,
Right.
trying to do their job as best they could, and they died.
Right.
I was the lead correspondent at CBS News simply because I got to work early that day. I'd interviewed Harry Belafonte the day before, and I was in the office early to screen tape. And a guy said, Byron, a plane just hit the World Trade Center. I need you to go downtown. Okay, man, be right there. I'm like, please. I closed my door, went back to what I was doing. He came in a few minutes later, used some choice words that my mother would have appreciated.
Yeah.
And I stopped what I was doing and went to Lower Manhattan. So I was there. I was in the car when the second plane hit. And I made it to the world. I was there before it collapsed, and I had to run with other people. Anyway, I remember being there and seeing people jump to their deaths.
Oh gosh.
Like, I remember seeing a man and a woman jump from the building, and I followed them all the way to the ground.
Yeah.
And so that was hard, just as a human being, because it was the first time in which I had witnessed death where the people played no direct role in how their lives ended.
Yeah, and felt that was their only choice.
Their best choice. Exactly. How bad the world must have been for them in that moment. And so then, like, certainly feeling as a journalist, the stakes were never higher in doing my job. In some ways, it was sort of the simplest day, like just tell the facts. Like I have to give my opinion. I don't have to appear particularly emotional. Just
Right.
tell the facts of what happened. And so that was a day that reminded me that journalism is important, that the American people, our audience, expect, deserve the truth, just facts. They don't, like who cared how I was feeling? My suit got dirty. I was tired. I was scared. Who cared? There was information people needed, and it's my job to give it to them. So that was a difficult day. So it was emotionally draining, but also reaffirmed, I think, the value of journalism. And the other difficult day, which has now turned into months, has been covering COVID-19. I've been a war correspondent, so I've been in lots of bad places, Somalia at different points, Somalia, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Kosovo, Haiti. So I've been to some bad neighborhoods. I've been to West Baltimore a couple of times. That's a joke. Right,
Yeah.
right. But usually in my professional life, I've had to get on a plane and fly
Right.
many hours to be in harm's way. But now the reality for all of us living in COVID-19 is every day you wake up, you're in harm's way. And the toll that takes not just on you as an individual, but people you care about from your family. Like at Nightline, we have a relatively young staff. Most of our producers are 20 something, 30 something. And this is the first real dramatic thing to happen in their life. And so wanting to be, as one of the elders of our newsroom, to be comforting to them can be draining. Comforting my own family, comforting myself.
Right.
Like, when you cough, like, oh my God, is there a frog in my throat or
Yeah.
do I have COVID? Right. And so I find that day and every day of covering this pandemic being tough.
Your two books are terrific reads. In the one, Be the One, you focus on, I guess it's 6 different stories of people. You basically talk about where do you go, where do you hide when the world hurts so much, which is really timely right now.
Yeah. I am, as you know, I'm an optimistic person by choice.
Mm-hmm.
I was raised to believe that. So I think a lot of it is that sort of the optimistic spirit, how you choose to look at things.
Yeah, there's a line in Shakespeare, and I was like 14 when I read it, but it really hit me. It was, I think it's in Hamlet. Nothing is anything but thinking make it so. And I've kind of found in my own life too, sometimes it's like, and even though it's really hard to get there, you sometimes feel like I can look at it this way or that way. I'm going to choose somehow to figure out
Yeah.
something through this.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. Because we don't necessarily have a lot of choices every day, but that's a choice you can make
Yeah,
and that you can live
yeah,
with. Yeah, I always tell. It's funny. Like I find for me, I just like to listen, right? Like just to. I'm quick to say I don't know. Like that's my favorite response. I don't know,
yeah.
man. It's just I don't know. I'm someone who's riddled with self-doubt about a lot of things most days of the week. And when I'm feeling particularly low about something, I think about who can I help? Who can I serve? That's kind of where I go. That I feel like as bad as I'm having it, somebody's having it worse. As bad as this moment, like, I think about it as because of what I've been blessed to do professionally and calling people like you friends. I think about the life that my grandmother had, my great grandmother who was born a slave, what her life was like. I remember once telling the story in Oklahoma. This white guy family had lost their house in a tornado. We go out and we shoot some, and we put our gear down. We're helping the guy look through the debris of his house. And I look over and he's smiling. And I say, because I'm from East Baltimore, the South, talking like, brother, you okay? He looks at me like, am I okay? I mean, look, my house is in shambles. I said, well, I'm looking over and you're smiling. He says, why are you smiling? He says, I count it all joy. I trust God. And there's the old saying that God doesn't put heavy burdens on weak shoulders. And then he says, I'm smiling because I'm thinking, I wish God didn't trust me so much. I'm feeling it. My grandmother used to say to my mother all the time, she said, baby, my mother was feeling down. My grandma says, baby, God doesn't put heavy burdens on weak shoulders. To which my mother say, well, God must think I'm twins because I'm carrying the weight of 2 people. Right. And then she'd laugh. So faith, knowing the importance of humor, choosing optimism. I mean, we never know, right? We never know how it's going to end, how it's going to turn out. But I think we can greet it in as optimistic a way as we possibly can. And that's what I choose to do.
Well, Byron, this has been unbelievable. First of all, your career, your attitude, the lessons that all of us can take from it in our daily life. I had the chance to first meet you through the Horatio Alger Association, where you were an honoree, and your story is so moving, and we began that conversation that day. And I just want to say thank you for this. And you can follow Byron on Twitter at Byron Pitts, as well as on Instagram at Byron Pitts ABC. Be sure to check him out. And Byron, you have been a terrific, inspirational guest, and thank you so much.
Thank you, brother. It's a real honor, and I look forward to seeing you down the road.